Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a UK election synopsis, really quick video hopefully, or somewhat quicker one than you're used to from me. What happened overnight, we had the UK elections. I was up till 5:30 in the morning watching all the results come through, even though it was something of a foregone conclusion. It was a huge landslide victory, although that does paper over a few cracks that are worth discussing in a wee while. The headline news is Labour have gotten almost a 300-seat majority in a parliament of 650 constituencies. 412 at the moment. There are 2 seats to count still, but basically 412 to Labour, 121 to the Conservatives. That is an absolute tonking. 71 to Lib Dem, so it's a few more for them. 9 for SNP, 7 for Sinn Féin. There, it's Northern Line, and others have 28. Others include 4 for Reform. And indeed, I think 4 for Green is it at the moment. Let's have a look. So as we come down, Independent 6, DUP 5. Yeah, 4 for Reform, 4 for Green, 4 for Plaid Cymru. And then some Northern Irish parties there as well. Goodness me, Greens have done pretty well. Reform, less well than exit polls suggested. So exit polls suggested they'll get about 13 seats. And that, as the night went on, they kept rejigging their predictions from moving from exit polls to actual real results coming in. And Reform, again, because of first past the post, they weren't getting the votes in targeted enough seats. We pretty much knew those 4 seats would go to Reform. But outside of that, from polls prior to the election, you're wondering about whether they get any more, maybe pick up 5. And the exit polls only went up to 13. It's like, oh, that's a big change. Anyway, as the night went through, it fell back down to 4. And indeed, the initial exit polls looked a bit better for the Conservatives. 160, I think, at one stage, and then that was changed back down, reviewed as the night went on. And Liberal Democrats actually did really, really well. That's their highest ever haul, I think. And the other big news was the SNP, the Scottish National Party, took an absolute beating in Scotland, and those votes went to Labour. Now, first of all, let's look at the map, and it's a massively different map compared to what it was in 2019. So this is a 2019 map, and you can see that the Conservatives had a pretty resounding victory across the country, although these red areas, they do belie the situation of these urban centres being very densely populated, having very small and numerous constituencies. So that's why it's often better to look at the hexagon map that gives you a better sense of how many seats Labour actually have when all of those constituencies are given the same area on the map, same literal area in a mathematical sense. But the map looked like this in 2019. Now it is vastly different. Look at that absolute wall of red up there, sea of red up here as well in the north of England, but also going into Scotland. Look at this vast area of formerly SNP seats, Labour prior to that. Then they've lost to the SNP over time. The last sort of 15 years, the SNP has eaten into that Labour, Scottish Labour heartland, and now Labour have had a resounding victory in Scotland. That is one of the big stories, as the SNP were absolutely hammered last night. There's 1 seat still to call in Scotland. I don't know where the other one still to call is. So yeah, that is one of the stories. Then the other story here that I've already mentioned is the huge northern bounce back for Labour, where they have taken loads of Conservative seats and taken back some of their old seats and gone further. And the other big story as well is Liberal Democrats. Liberal Democrats, I said the southwest of England is going to look very different, and lo and behold, that's exactly what's happened. A few Conservatives held on to some massive losses. So first of all, something like 16, at least I haven't seen since then, but at 5:30 this morning, something like 16 cabinet ministers and associated top ranking Conservatives have lost their seats. Absolutely devastating for the Conservatives. I mean, some real big hitters, people with a lot of pedigree, Penny Mordaunt, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I'm very happy he lost his seat, I have to be quite honest. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, we're going to hear from him in a second. So that's a big story. In the south of England and the southwest, the Liberal Democrats did exactly what they were threatening to do, which is take some of those affluent seats off the Conservatives and some of the more rural seats in the southwest. And then you have another story, which is Green taking 4 and Reform taking 4. They will be complaining a lot about first past the post and wanting proportional representation, because technically, if you're going to reflect the Reform vote, you would see, let's go up here. Where are they in terms of percentage of vote? Reform. 14.3% of the vote, so somewhat lower than they were initially polled, but still 4 million votes, right? And 14% of the MP of the 14% of the national vote share, and to only get four MPs when like 10% is 65 MPs, right? They got 14%, so 65 plus another 30. I mean, they should have 90 odd MPs, and they get 4. So first past the post, I think, will be talked about an awful lot. Electoral reform will be on the cards in the national discussion going forward, and so it rightly should be. We talked about last night, there are some disadvantages to it, but I think the advantages, such as having your electoral desires represented better, is huge. So there were a few big losses for Labour, where they lost to the Greens in Bristol, and they lost to an independent in the north. One of the places was, which one was it? It wasn't Ashfield. That went to Reform. One of these pinks there was I think, was it Dewsbury and Batley? No, it wasn't Blackburn. Anyway, one of these went to an independent independent candidate who was campaigning, I believe, on Gaza and Israel, and with high sort of Muslim vote share, they won there. It might have been further down. There's some in Leicester that were interesting, and that was a big hitter, Jonathan Ashworth, who is a Labour big hitter who lost out there, and that was a really big, here it is, I think it might have been Leicester South or Leicester West, or whichever one. Yeah, Leicester South. And that's a really big bit of news for the Labour Party, bad news for the Labour Party. They lost Debonair in Bristol Central, and I think, as I say, Leicester South, I think, was Jonathan Ashworth. And yeah, real big hitters. But otherwise, Labour absolutely, wiped the floor. But the big but is this, right? Their majority is very wide, but very shallow. So they have taken a massive suite of seats. This is a record-breaking election. It's a huge landslide win. But the but here is that they have taken, let's have a look at the numbers. They have received 9.6 million votes. They've got 412 seats. And the Conservatives have only 121. If we look at the, where are we going to go? We're going to look at, the 1997 election, which was a resounding success for the Labour Party. They took a huge majority then. They had 418 seats won, but the Conservatives had a lot more, 165. The vote wasn't so split. And so what we learn here is that Labour didn't necessarily win like they did in 1997, where people went out and voted for Labour. People were voting against the Conservatives. And that is also reflected in the turnout. So the turnout in this election is at the moment sitting around 60%, right? 60% compared to 71.3% in 1997. They had 418 seats in 1997. They've got 414 seats now, so it's a 412. It's a resounding success for Labour, but it is one that's been done on a lower turnout. And if you look at the popular vote, Labour got 13.5 million votes in 1997, and they got the same amount of seats pretty much this election, and an even bigger victory because the Conservatives got even more decimated. A vote was split for them. And Labour did that this time round with 4 million fewer votes, 9.68 million votes. So this tells us that people didn't go out to vote. There was less appetite for voting just across the board. But also, it wasn't so much that Labour got a huge vote. It's that the Conservatives got a really small vote. And why did they get a really small vote? Because the reform, the surge in reform votes took votes predominantly from the Conservatives. So there's 4 million votes there that pretty much, well, most of them would have gone to the Conservatives. And had, 3 million of those 4 million votes gone to the Conservatives, then they get a bigger vote than the Labour Party. Reform won this election for Labour. Disaffection with Conservatives won this election for Labour. So Labour need to be very careful that they've got a very big mandate, but it's not a solid mandate that's very deep. It's a very shallow mandate based on disaffection with the other party. So there isn't this huge upswell for support of Labour that is kind of intrinsic to Labour. It's more to do with that disaffection. And then you had the Liberal Democrats also doing pretty well, taking some of those Conservative votes as well. And then you had the SNP falling apart in Scotland. So indeed, I think there was something that kind of summed this up in one of the, no, it's not there, in one of the news pieces. If we go to the live updates and we look at what they say about, so yeah, View from Scotland. No, where is it? View from Wales, this was it. So Labour wins big despite drop in vote share. And this kind of sums up the election as a whole. What a story in Wales, given what happened 5 years ago. So for those who don't know, Wales has gone from having a large, successful area in the south of Wales for Labour, if you're thinking Cardiff and Swansea and that kind of area. Tories doing fairly well, and Plaid Cymru up in the rest of Wales. But then this time round, you had, if we go back to the map, you have Labour doing much better around the whole of Wales, and also so much better in the north of Wales. You've got a Green doing well. You've got in Hereford, actually, although that's next door. You've got Lib Dems taking one. You've got Plaid Cymru increasing their seats. You've got Labour, really decimating the Tories there. And as this little statement says, Labour has won big and the Conservatives have been wiped out in Wales. But beneath that are so many subplots. Labour has achieved it despite a significant drop in their share of the vote, the lowest raw number of votes since the 1930s. So what an incredible difference to the electoral map in Wales, and the Labour Party doing exceptionally well. But the reality is that came on the back of the lowest vote share and the lowest Labour number of votes since the 1930s. Absolutely incredible. It's one of the oddities of the first past the post system that you can win by trying to concentrate votes exactly where you need them. That relative lack of enthusiasm from voters is already causing some concern, jubilant mood notwithstanding. One of the Labour campaign mantras has been that Wales will benefit from two Labour governments working together. Voters will want to see that in action, and quickly. So there is this I think idea that Labour are going to get a very short honeymoon period, and people are going to expect lots of things, probably with less forgiveness that there would have been in 1997. They had a long honeymoon period, maybe even a 3-year honeymoon period in 1997. This shallow but wide vote for Labour this time round, I think, is going to afford the Labour Party a very small honeymoon period and people's expectations will be possibly unrealistic for Labour to turn something around in a short time period, when lots of people are complaining about fundamentally broken Britain, the NHS and education, etc. Right, The other thing, I'm going to leave you with this. So three things. First of all, the good news, I think, and by the way, I'm wearing a red t-shirt, not because I'm pro-Labour or anything. It's my most nationalistic t-shirt. It says, keep calm by focusing on philosophy. It's not because of my pro-Labourness there. I just thought I'd say that. One thing that's good news for the country as a whole going forward is that Rishi Sunak and a number of people, I think we've got Jeremy Hunt saying it in a second, a number of top Conservatives, including the outgoing Prime Minister, have made a point of saying that Keir Starmer is a decent man. He's a man of integrity. And, you know, when you've had bitter campaigns taking place where you're slagging each other off, I think for a lot of Conservatives to come out and say something that I've said previously, which is you look at the career of Keir Starmer and you look at what he's done as a lawyer and attorney general and so on and so forth. He is a man of integrity, I think, and he just seems like a decent human being. Yeah, he's not Mr. Charisma. He's not Boris Johnson. He's not Donald Trump. He's a man who's just, you know, willing to, it seems, get on with the job, work really hard, and is very serious about running the country. And a changed Labour Party. His speech that he gave after 326 seats were reached, you know, when it was clear that the Labour Party had won, was a decent speech, but it talked an awful lot about not just the change for the UK, but a change in the Labour Party. This is a changed Labour Party. Kept belabouring that point. Excuse the pun. And I think we can be confident that Keir Starmer is a decent human being. Like, I know people would like to slag him off if you're from the other party, from the other side, but I think we need to understand that we've elected someone, hopefully, that will be a good role model in terms of politics. So that's a first thing to note. A few other things. We're going to go to look at Ukraine. Actually, let's concentrate a little bit on Ukraine. I picked out two speeches here that when I was listening to them live last night, I was actually applauding. And these are two. One's an outgoing Conservative, actually now the former Defence Secretary, and we also have Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, also formerly in the Health Secretary as well. So we're going to go first to Grant Shapps. And this is interesting in light of the fact that he has just been, his latest role was Defence Secretary, and he was Secretary of Defence, and he's very proud of that. And just listen to what he says.
It's clear tonight that Britain will have a new government in the morning, and I am extremely concerned that unless it quickly commits to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, our armed forces may suffer. And so will our friends in Ukraine. If there's something that I'm incredibly proud about in Britain today, it's our staunch and unwavering support for Ukraine and its democracy. And that must never waver, even through a change of government here at home. What is crystal clear to me tonight is that it's not so much that Labour won.
It's that Conservatives lost. And I think he's absolutely right in saying that. But it's really good to see that focus on Ukraine from the outgoing Defence Secretary there, and shows how important Ukraine is to the government, to the outgoing government. They realise the seriousness of what's going on in Ukraine. Indeed, Rishi Sunak mentioned it in his outgoing speech as well. And Jeremy Hunt, I think, said it best. Now, unfortunately, I think the sound when it was happening was not very good anyway. They had problems and there was a bit of a delay. So it will only come out of one of your ears if you're listening on the headphone. But he's going to start with a very fascinating thing that he said as former health secretary, which I think is, I don't know quite what to make of this. Just have a listen. So let's see if I've turned up the sound to this. You will hear it only in one ear.
I was incredibly proud to serve under Rishi Sunak, but I wish the incoming Labour government well. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are decent people and committed public servants who have changed the Labour Party for the better, whatever our policy differences. We all now need them to succeed. I hope in particular they use their majority to make much needed reforms to the NHS in a way that is sometimes difficult for Conservative governments to do.
Fascinating. So first of all, he's again another one that's called Keir Starmer, decent person, and Rachel Reeves as well, who will be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, replacing him. And he wishes him well, which is, nice to see. But also talks, as a former health secretary, talks about hopes that the Labour can do things to the NHS that he found it much more difficult to do because of being in the Conservative Party. I'm just trying to work out what he's trying to say there. It looks like it's a barbed attack on the Tories, maybe there's this theory that the Conservatives try to underfund the NHS so that it falls apart and they can replace it with a private model, such as you see in America or elsewhere around the world. And so therefore there's this kind of purposeful sabotaging of the NHS. And because it's this big icon of the welfare state associated more with the left wing, it under Conservative governments, you can argue it doesn't quite get the investment that it needs. It turns up at the top. The UK turns up at the top of the Commonwealth Fund reports each year on I think it's Big 12 countries around the world and their health services. We used to do really well in the NHS across lots of categories, and now we seem to do the best in one main category, which is efficiency, which means doing more with less money. So yeah, we're very efficient, although people talk about wastage in the NHS, like compared to other health services, actually it operates at kind of capacity. Because it's underfunded. We just need to fund it more. And I think he could be just having a go at the lack of proper investment from the Conservatives into the NHS, and saying that is just something that they can't do. Maybe it's ideologically they are unable to do it, but hopefully the Labour Party will be able to do that. So I thought that was interesting. Then he goes on to finish his speech with, I think he finishes it incredibly strongly, and he talks about Ukraine.
This may seem like a tough day for our family as we move out of Downing Street, but it isn't. We are incredibly lucky to live in a country where decisions like this are made not by bombs or bullets, but by thousands of ordinary citizens peacefully placing crosses in boxes on bits of paper. Brave Ukrainians are dying every day to defend their right to do what we did yesterday, and we must never take that for granted. Don't be sad. This is the magic of democracy. Thank you.
I think that was incredibly powerful. I gave it a resounding round of applause on my own in the lounge at like 4:30 in the morning or whenever it was, just to finish on Ukraine as the outgoing Chancellor of the Exchequer. So here's a man that's in charge of the purse strings, and obviously Ukraine is an important part of his working out where money was spent, right? And that tells you something. But also the idea that we are incredibly lucky in the UK. Like even the US, where you look at January the 6th and this peaceful transfer of power didn't take place. I know that's still a hot button issue for people out there. But in the UK, we've had a campaign that has seen people go at each other, but then once it's over, Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt being really gracious in defeat and owning it and saying, look, we need to look inwardly. We lost this, Labour didn't win it. But Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, these are decent people. They're taking over. They're going to do it. They're hopefully going to do a good job, and their successes are our successes as people in the UK. So I think that's really gracious and important. But it reflects this peaceful transfer of power that we should not take for granted. It's not done with bullets and bombs. We look at Ukraine, and there are people dying to hold on to their idea of democracy and sovereignty, and we should not take what we have for granted. We should cherish it. The fact that we can sort out our political differences by putting crosses in boxes on bits of paper is an incredibly powerful sentiment when compared to the travails and tribulations and trials across the world in so many countries, particularly Ukraine, as you and I focus on so often. So I thought that was really good from Jeremy Hunt, really good indeed. So the end result is that we have a huge electoral victory for Labour, but it's not as deep as you might think. We can see it stretch right across the UK in all of these small constituencies in the south of Wales, in London, in the Midlands, in the north, all of these tiny but very densely populated areas, in the northeast, in urban areas of Scotland where SNP have been pretty much decimated. That's a big story. Lib Dems doing well is a big story in the south. Reform being the new kids on the block. Still only getting 4 though, not as much as they were expecting maybe at the beginning of the night with the exit polls. 4 for the Green Party. That's really good. So Waveney Valley, Hereford, North Herefordshire, Bristol Central, and I presume therefore they did win in Brighton Pavilion as well, which is fantastic news. Caroline Lucas's old seat. So they're on the scene. But that majority that the Labour Party got isn't as big a mandate as you might think, given the low turnout and the low number of votes that they got compared to previous elections. So there's so many subplots going on here. Let's hope for the success of all, because it's very easy to be partisan and hope that when the party that you hate got in, you want them to do badly, because of course that means your country does badly, and that there's a tension there, and we see this often in the hyper partisan nature of American politics, where like you want your president to fail because they're the other guys, when actually it means by extension if they fail the country's failing, so you want your country to fail just so your guy can get in. It becomes very tribal. It's very easy to get like that with whichever country we live in. At the moment I want the UK government to succeed so that we invest in our public sector, in our services, so that we can get our energy companies acting responsibly, investing in our energy infrastructure, so that we can get the railway sorted, so that we can get our utilities sorted, so that we need to invest in the NHS big time. We need education back on track. In 1997, the Labour campaign slogan was education, education, education. It'd be great to get back to some of that. We need to also be considering defence and foreign policy very carefully with Israel and Gaza and with Ukraine. And I just hope that Keir Starmer's new Labour Party, as it has swung very much to the centre, can keep things stable and steady, but have change as well for the better of us in the UK and those whom we impact outside of the UK, Ukraine particularly. So that's the story of the night. Hopefully that was of use. Take care, guys. I'll get on with my normal Ukraine videos.